Hey! Hello and welcome to Rootstock. This is the second live stream of the day. We've just had lunch and I'm full of cake, which is brilliant. Just in case you've just joined us, hello, my name is Russell Arnott. I am one of the project managers for the Gatsby Plant Science Education Programme. It's my job to help people just like plants better. That is basically my job. Who are you?
My name is Alex Jenkin and I'm another project manager for the Gatsby Plant Science Education Programme, and I run the school side of the programme. So anyone there who's watching from a school or as a teacher, then great to have you with us.
You're awesome.
Thank you very much.
Awesome human beings, clearly. There we go. So the theme of this lime stream.
Lime is a plant.
Lime is that's allowed. We're allowed to say lime stream. The theme of this live stream is the possibilities of plants. So we're going to look at all the amazing things that plants can do for us and help us out of sticky situations, like little things like feeding the world or climate change. Just these tiny little things that we might need to deal with in the non too distant future. So we've got 5 amazing videos that have been made by teams of biology undergraduates from across the universities across the whole of the UK. We're going to be showcasing some of those videos today. We're going to be talking to awesome plant science researchers and the students themselves, and just basically trying to show off all the amazing things that plants can do. Is that about it? Is that when you say anything else?
Yeah, I think that's it. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat on the YouTube channel. We'll pick them up. We can bring them up on the screen, or just some comments if you're really enjoying a particular video, pop those up as well. And we'll try and answer those as we go through. We're going to have some guests joining us here in our lecture theatre studio. Yeah, hopefully we're in for a good afternoon.
That sounds awesome. So we're going to kick things off with an amazing video all about sunflowers, and in particular, the superpowers of sunflowers.
Take a look at this sunflower. What do you notice about it? It's got bold, bright yellow petals. It's growing very tall. It might make you think of summertime, with its long days and warm weather. You might have seen them growing in a garden, or wrapped up in cellophane in a flower shop in August. You may have even seen the sunflower logo on the green lanyard during the global pandemic. Many people thought it was only used to show that they were exempt from wearing a face mask, but it is in fact a universal symbol to let others know that someone may need a bit more support and time in public spaces. The sunflower symbol represents hidden disabilities, which you can't see just by looking at someone. Something else that you may not be able to see are hidden superpowers. Let's take a closer look at that sunflower again. What can you see in the centre of the sunflower? If we get a bit closer, you can see some speckles. Seeds. These are a great tasty snack that are beneficial for your health. These super seeds are good for your immune system, as they contain vitamins and minerals, like vitamin E. They also have another superpower too. Once crushed, they can be made into sunflower oil. Sunflower oil can be used in cooking as a healthier alternative. This super oil contains lots of unsaturated fats. These are good for your heart health as they lower bad cholesterol levels in your blood. We can use plants and plant products in our cookings to improve our diets and health. Food is an important fuel source, and we know that sunflowers can fuel our bodies, but did you know they can also fuel our cars? This is another of their hidden superpowers, making green biofuel. Biofuel is unique because unlike petrol, it is not made from fossil fuels. It is made from living matter, such as food waste and animal and plant waste. Because of the sunflower seed's high oil content, sunflowers make an ideal biofuel crop. Climate change is an ever-increasing problem, and we need to reduce burning fossil fuels to help save the planet. Sunflowers can be replanted as a renewable fuel source and even absorb waste carbon dioxide gas via photosynthesis. As well as being a super fuel crop, sunflowers can provide super support for other crops as well. A traditional planting method called the Three Sisters plants 3 crops close together to help each other out. These companion plants provide structure, shade, and enrich the soil for each other. Since sunflower stems are very sturdy and tall, they provide great support for creeping plants such as beans and tomatoes. Once the sunflowers have finished flowering, their stems can be recycled to create garden trellises and furniture. Sunflowers are just one type of plant with hidden superpowers. Now that's got me thinking, what else can plants do? Think of all the other hidden superpowers waiting to be discovered. We need more plant scientists. We need more plant superheroes just like you.
Fantastic, really love that video. I mean, I feel like sunflowers are such an iconic plant. They are absolutely brilliant. I mean, who doesn't like a sunflower? Fields of sunflowers, they're pretty snazzy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously I like the colour yellow. So,
There we go.
yeah, really working for me.
In many ways, you are a sunflower up here on stage with me.
Thanks,
Anyway.
thanks Russell.
On that note, we'll switch over to our other sunflower on stage. We're joined by the wonderful Dan Jenkins.
Hello.
On our sofa over here. So, who are you?
So I'm the head of the Gatsby Plant Science Education Programme, which is the project that funds this rootstock initiative that we're doing at the moment. And it's a project funded by the Gatsby Charitable Foundation to try and promote plant science in schools and with young people. So hopefully you out there all getting engaged with this plant science stuff today.
Fantastic. So, because you actually have a background in botany, is this correct?
That's right, yeah.
So I'm curious. So sunflowers, have they popped up on your radar? Do they feature highly?
Well, I remember the Blue Peter Grow Your Tallest Sunflower competition. I don't think Blue Peter do that anymore. I wish they did, because I remember trying to get the tallest sunflower that I could. So yes, certainly, as long as I can remember, I've seen sunflowers.
So just out of curiosity, how tall was your sunflower?
I was about 3 meters, which was as a 6-year-old was quite tall.
That's tall for me as an adult. 3 meters is a big sunflower. There we go. So I thought it was really interesting what Isabel touched on her video about sunflower also being like a symbol of hidden disabilities, and I think this is one of the things that potentially we struggle with in society is we're very accepting of people whose disabilities may be a bit more aware, but I'm just wondering if you could share some insight into, I don't know, hidden disabilities and what we can all do to kind of facilitate those with.
Absolutely. So I went on a course recently to find out a little bit more about hidden disabilities and conditions, and I was fascinated to find out that 1 in 5 people have a disability, and 80% of those are hidden. So it's quite fascinating that you see the visible ones, you can see that the physical disabilities, but there are so many, around 65 they think, hidden disabilities that you can't see. You wouldn't know from looking at someone whether they've got a disability or not. So that lanyard that became quite popular during the pandemic was really helpful to highlight that the sunflower is a nice way of being able to say, not just, which I thought it was, I have to confess, I'm deaf, I can't hear you, I thought that's what it was for, but actually it could be just something that shows that I tire easily. I've got something that means I can't work quite as hard for as long. I need more frequent breaks. I park in a disabled space because of something that's not visible. I have a hidden disability that means that I need to be able to get into the shop more easily. So I think there are lots of things that we should be looking for in terms of hidden disabilities and supporting them in the workplace particularly, and throughout education as well.
Fantastic. So I was going to say, so what can we all do to kind of be a bit more hidden disability friendly?
I mean, talk to people. So the piece of advice, Ted Smith at the Laboratory of Molecular Biology here in Cambridge has written a book called Hidden Disabilities, creating a good place, a workplace for hidden disabilities. Talk to people, because you might think you know the best way that you can help someone with a particular disability, but everyone suffers a disability in a different way, and it's good to make sure that if you're working with someone, whether that's in your education space or your workplace, that you understand the best things that you can do to help them get the most out of whatever it is you're doing with them.
Fantastic. And I know we've been working quite closely with Emily May Armstrong, who's a big advocate, she's a big plant scientist who's trying to help plant science laboratories become more disability friendly and kind of explain that. So yeah, fantastic. You got anything you'd like to ask Dan?
I think just while Dan's here, and we've asked a few other people this on the live stream so far, but it'd be interesting to understand your journey from studying, but from growing that sunflower at age 6 to where you are now, and that's just a really interesting thing for us to hear about.
So I studied botany at university. I think I wanted to go and study biomedicine or biochemistry, but I did a project whilst I carried out my A-levels to look at tomatoes, and I researched how to grow the perfect tomato, because at the time the world's first genetically modified tomato had been created. I thought, wow, that sounds a really interesting thing. What are they doing there? So I did a little project for my A-levels, and that was my own little bit of investigative kind of research, looking at the literature. I became fascinated about the sorts of research that goes on in plant science. So I went and changed my career trajectory, studied botany. I loved it, amazing, it's great, really good. But I know that through doing so, not everyone has that shared passion, and I really became puzzled as to why and how people don't necessarily see that interest that I could see myself. So I went into some research environments and I looked at plant science research, but that nagging kind of, why does everybody think I do floristry? What's this about? Why has that happened? So I studied a course in science communication to understand a bit about how people communicate and understand ideas, and then science education. So I did a master's in science education, and specifically looked at what happens in education. Why do primary school children find plant science so fantastic? You grow your seeds, you grow your cress in your year 1 class. Then you get to secondary school and you learn the dreaded photosynthesis equation. What happens? Is it the student? Is it the content? What is it that causes that change in interest in plant science? So yeah, and then I managed to find the organisation for which I work now. Was looking for someone to do some project management. So I applied for the job, and I've been working trying to enthuse other people with plant science for 10 years now.
Amazing. So I always ask this, but have you got a favourite plant and why?
Yes, another plant from my childhood. I remember possibly where that early sort of spark. I grew runner beans with my dad in the garden. And I remember putting the runner bean in the ground, you turn around, you go back a week later, it's grown. I just remember thinking, how? It looks dead. You put what looks like a stone in the ground, and it turns into a plant. I just wanted to know the answers. And I got through most of my undergraduate degree, and I still didn't really know the answers. So yeah, I think there's so many questions and things out there to find out about plants. They're an amazing thing to study.
Fantastic, thank you ever so much. So we're going to move on to, which is a really weird idea about plants. So I think everyone here in the room with me are just massive plant nerds, but this is like a really weird question, and the name of this next video is, can fish grow on trees? Which is really weird. Like, what is this video going to be about? Someone has made some kind of super fish tree, which sounds like it would smell hideous. I definitely don't want to smell a fish tree, but I'm hoping that's what this video is going to be about. So let's find out.
Here's a fish swimming in the sea. Oily fish are naturally rich in EPA and DHA, both of which belong to the group of fatty acids called omega-3. They offer many health benefits and help especially to keep our hearts healthy. Our body, however, can't really synthesize these, but it is recommended that we consume at least 450 mg of EPA and DHA per day from our diet. However, we have a problem. If everyone in the world followed these guidelines, it wouldn't work. The global fish stock can only support 16% of the demand for omega-3. Sadly, the population of fish in the ocean has dropped rapidly since the Industrial Revolution began due to overfishing. So, fish oils are good for us, but not so much for the fish. But what if I tell you that fish can grow on trees? Surely that can't be possible. Well, using genes, plant scientists at Rothamsted Research have figured out a way. Genes are a series of codes that are like instruction manuals for a cell to produce certain molecules. They are isolated genes that are responsible for the production of EPA and DHA. Those genes are then built into a little ring of DNA called a D plasmid. They co-open this ring of DNA with a restriction enzyme, which is a molecule that acts like little DNA scissors that cuts at a specific place on the DNA sequence. They then put the T plasmid with fish oil gene into a nifty little bacterium called the agrobacterium. The agrobacterium then goes on to infect a plant called Camelina sativa, commonly known as camelina, a plant that produces oily seeds. The agrobacteriums invade the plant cell and incorporates parts of its DNA into the plant genome, and alongside with it, the instructions to make EPA and DHA. Now scientists have created a plant that produces oil rich in EPA and DHA, just like fish such as salmon and sardine. But unlike fish, plants can be grown easily on land, and they're a lot more efficient because they get their energy directly from the sun. Most importantly, no fish are harmed in harvesting, and we don't have to catch so many for our heart health. So good news for us, good news for the fish. And it doesn't stop here. Scientists are discovering more and more genes for the many molecules that are useful to us humans, from fish oils to rice rich in vitamin, to new types of fuel to vaccines. So yes, fish do grow on trees, and so can many more useful things.
That was such a beautiful video. I've got to say, I found it really calming. I was just like, it's like like one of those podcasts you put on to kind of learn things as you're drifting off to sleep. Yeah. So the owner of that very calming, very serene voice happens to be here with us on the sofa. Hello.
Hiya, thanks for having me.
Cool, thanks for coming in. So yeah, Hao, that was a beautiful video. Did you do those animations?
I did, I drew them myself.
That was just absolutely brilliant. And I've got to say, like, what an amazing piece of research that we now live in a world where we can do that kind of thing. And my background is in the ocean. So, and this is, you know, a lot of our stocks are overfished, and a lot of the, you know, we've taken loads of fish to get the omega-3 oils, and now we're switching to krill to get the omega-3 oils. So to be able to actually grow those omega-3s straight and get them straight from the plants is a phenomenal kind of piece of research. So I'm curious how you kind of came across that, and like what sparked your interest in it.
So I think initially I was interested in, it's almost like an idea of sort of absurdity, you know, when you have something that is something but it's not something, it's something else instead. And then the people from the Gatsby Plant Science program pointed me to this particular research, and I thought, wow, this is actually really, really interesting. And so yeah, that's why I decided to do it on this particular topic. And I think it's also fascinating because it sounds like something that is very sort of distant in the future, like it sounds science fiction like, but the truth is it's actually, well, it's already there, the technology. And yeah, so that's how I came across to this.
Yeah, I really liked how you put it across with that kind of like you say, an absurd idea to start out with, and then I think that it's a really sort of interesting hook to draw people into the story.
Hook. I see what you did there with the fish.
Oh yeah, that I was completely deliberate.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've got to say, I did like the bit at the end where it said fin. For the people who don't know that, French art house films, they end with fin, which means end. Very clever. And what else was fins? Fish. That was subtlety. It was not lost on a culture gentleman such as myself. Anyway, I'll shut up. Yeah, so I'm curious now that you've encountered this new research. are you like, ooh, what else could I do? Is this like an area of research you're thinking that you'd like to go into in the future? Is this, or what other things you've encountered en route that that you're like, oh, actually, there's this new piece of research where they're doing this. I don't know if you've thought about any of those things. Or?
Ooh. So I'm studying molecular and cellular biology, so I'll be very interested in knowing like what transgenesis can do, you know, whether that's in this particular situation, you know, we have like a new type of food nutrients being made in plants. But I think for me it's also just in general the sort of the universality behind the biological processes that fascinates me a lot, and you know, and subsequently what is possible with it.
So you talk about the universality, meaning that there's a lot of like similar themes that run throughout different biological processes.
In a way, I guess. I think fundamentally, because you know, like DNA is the basic code for all forms of life in the world, and to me, that's like because we are not that different from other sort of existence that's alive, I guess. And I think that kind of goes back to the point where we're saying that there's less interest in plant science, but in fact it's all kind of very relevant, and then they are very complex as well, with like, you know, all sort of chemical processes going on in the background, and so they are interlinked. I think we're all sort of interlinked.
Yeah, that's definitely something when we're trying to talk about plants, when we're thinking about trying to new ways of getting people excited about plants, and thinking about teaching plants and teaching plant biology in schools. And you kind of have to name it as plant biology to be its thing, because it's the plant science bit, but also there are loads of things that happen in plants that happen in animals, that happen in bacteria, that happen in fungi, and there are all these different processes, not, you know, like you say, like with DNA, but also with all sorts of other things. You know, we often study osmosis in plants, for example, and we can look at that, and that's a really important biological process that happens across the whole of biology. So I think that for me, you can use plants to look at these ideas and explore them a bit further. That's one of the advantages of working with plants, is you can poke them about a bit more than one should if one is working with other species. So.
Definitely, and there's a really interesting video on our platform by David Bolcom, who talks through about plants and studying plants have led to broad understandings in biology as a whole that aren't just things to do with plants. So by studying plants, you actually find out more about all biology, not just plants, which I think is pretty cool. So yeah, there we go. Yeah, fantastic video. So moving on to our next video then. I'm quite excited about this one. So we've done from, I guess, quite a high science, I'd say, that we were just doing there. This is now more, I think, kind of a more emotional side to what plants can do. And this is the link between plants and our mental well-being. So if we could rack up this next video, that'd be great.
In a world moving faster and further into the realm of technology and urbanization, we rarely get the chance to stop and smell the flowers. But if we did, we would feel the healing and calming properties of nature. Did you know that fragrance molecules from different plants can be detected by receptors in the nose and converted into electrical impulses that get sent to the brain at different frequencies? These frequencies are organized into separate classes named after the letters of the Greek alphabet, and they control various cognitive functions such as alertness, calmness, and drowsiness. A concentrated source of plant fragrance is essential oils. These contain compounds known as terpenes, which affect the brain when inhaled. For example, the fragrance of mint increases the activity of the alpha class of brainwaves, boosting our alertness, while lavender, on the other hand, increases the activity of theta brainwaves, making you calmer and drowsier. Plant scientists found that when mothers and newborns took lavender baths, newborns cried less and their mothers smiled more. However, plants do not need to be highly concentrated into essential oils for us to experience their therapeutic effects. Hydrosols such as rosewater, or even fresh flowers, can positively affect our mental state.
In one study, some plant scientists wanted to find out the effect that a species of rose known as the wishing rose had on the brain. The first thing they did was perform a POMS test, which is a questionnaire designed by psychologists to assess the mental state of a person. When subjects were in the presence of the wishing rose, the answers they gave showed that the rose had a sedative effect on the subjects. This was then followed up by another test that measured the parasympathetic nerve activity of the subjects, which is high when subjects are calm. So the scientists prepared 4 samples: whole wishing roses and wishing rose petals, which could both be smelt and seen, a blind, which is a rose but covered so that it can only be smelt and not seen, and finally they prepared a control, which could be smelt but not seen, in this case plain water. For the blind sample, an increase in parasympathetic nerve activity was detected, indicating the rose's sedative effect as expected. However, for the whole flowers and the petals, the sedative effect strangely seemed to decrease. The scientists then recalled another pink flower known as the Petunia hybrida, whose color was found to uplift subjects and make them feel more energized. Based on this, the scientists concluded that it was the energizing pink color of the wishing rose that neutralized the calming effect of its fragrance.
Isn't it interesting that according to the psychological POMS test, a rose's scent and appearance calms people down, but according to the physiological parasympathetic nerve activity, the rose's scent and appearance have 2 completely different yet both still equally positive effects? What more is there waiting to be discovered in the plant world of colors and smells? Clearly, plants have an impressive range of miraculous healing powers just waiting to be discovered. With mental health diseases on the rise as our modern world continues to transform at breakneck speed, we need to realize, appreciate, and explore the power of plants in therapy and in our daily well-being. I believe we need to take a step forward and go back to nature.
That was awesome. I really love, I think all the fun science happens when you overlap really interesting areas. And taking this like area of psychology and I guess kind of like botanochemistry, is that a word?
Sure, it is now.
Yeah, I just made this up. There we go. Kept the chemicals of flowers and it's colour psychology and all this, and bringing it in together. Absolutely fantastic video. So we're joined on the sofa by Rui and Katie. So Rui made the video, and so I'm interested as to like how you first like came across this piece of research and what like inspired you to go on to make the video about it.
So I had a look at this article that was listing out the 100 different problems that plant science could potentially solve, and there was one about well-being, and that one caught my eye because I feel like it's something that we don't often associate with plant science. Usually we go down the route of like tackling disease or feeding like a population that is growing. So I really wanted to try and explore a different aspect of plant science. And also I think it was pretty relevant because we had just come out of the pandemic and everyone probably would have experienced anxiety and like feelings like that plant science could solve.
Yeah, it's, yeah, fascinating. And so I guess, yeah, these chemicals, I mean, I was really interested in like the difference between like, you know, something simple like the difference between mint and lavender. So I guess like, have you encountered any other kind of like, whoa, this is kind of cool, or this chemical in this plant does this, like on your, like, I guess when you were researching this video or just on your travels, if you've encountered anything that's, you've been like, whoa, that was pretty cool.
So like in terms of
Or
smells
smells, or just, yeah, something that surprised you about how plants, impacted the humans, you know, people's mental health or behavior or emotions or something.
I just found it interesting how so many aspects of the plant could affect a human differently. So like the visual aspect, the smells, and even sounds as well. And I think something that I didn't go into in this video, but the color green makes you calm apparently, and that's why they have green rooms that people sit in before interviews like this, yeah, to calm the people down before.
I'd not made that. I'd heard that about the colour green before, but I'd not made the association of that's why green rooms were traditionally painted green.
That's really interesting. Because
I like that.
I've heard of drunk tank pink, which is where if you're like an angry drunk person that gets arrested, the inside of the police cell is painted with this particular colour of pink that's supposed to calm you down, which I guess feeds maybe back into that flower psychology.
Interesting. I think I was just going to jump at some of those chemicals that you mentioned. Were you talking about the terpenes in the lavender and the mint? And it's interesting. Those are they're often like defensive for the plant. They're defense chemicals, so things to discourage animals from eating them. And yet they're things that we as humans were like, oh, that's quite nice actually.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I think, so we've also got on the sofa, we have got Katie. And Katie is a horticulturalist who specialises in lots and lots of different types of plants. But I'm guessing it's quite interesting, this idea of trying to find new species to take, compounds of value and things like that. I don't know if you have any experience with this too.
I think I'd probably say, so part of my role is working in the experimental section, so that's working with researchers like yourself, and part of that role is to basically help them with their experiments from start to finish, but then explain those experiments to the general public. So we have the circadian beds, how plants tell the time, we have the pigmentation beds, so we're looking at how cotton can be dyed in a natural way. And then we have, again, going back to sunflowers and Dan, we have the branching beds as well to show how plants can be branched. So yeah, from that point of view, but not from a compound point of view, no, that's far too specialist, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Because I know, originally, I know back like when Linnaeus kind of came up with his way of, like 200, 300, 400 years ago, we thought there was about 6,000 different plant species, and now that number has increased exponentially, and we're still finding new species all the time. And so this is one of the reasons we often talk about like conserving plants and rainforests and things from we need to make sure that we're maintaining biodiversity, and we're expected to kind of do that or recognise that that's the thing that we want to do altruistically. But actually, all these plants could hold very important compounds and stuff in them. So I don't know if this is something that if you're like, oh yeah, I mean, like for example, there's the Madagascan periwinkle.
That would be the go-to example I would go to.
Yeah, so you probably know more about this than I do.
I'm
totally battered that.
No, the short version of the story is that from the Madagascan periwinkles, the drug was developed that's for treatment for cancer. So it's a very valuable drug, and now I think we have to be careful not to harvest too much Madagascan periwinkle, because obviously it's a very valuable substance. But I think just thinking about what you're talking about, and these scents, and thinking around aromatherapy, that I think sometimes science can be a bit dismissive of these things and of different treatments in different cultures and different. Actually, when they're explored, then actually there are these effects that are going on, and just because they don't fit into the model that we have at the moment necessarily, then doesn't mean that they're not worth exploring and looking at.
Exactly. I guess this is we've worked with Rebecca Lazarou, who is a herbalist based at Kew Gardens, and she going through historical texts and looking at compounds and things that have been traditionally used, and then trying to, there's a record of this plant being used for this, and so what is the active chemical in that's causing this to happen and things. So yeah, it's a really exciting overlap between, I guess, psychology and botany and exploring the world.
She works with like some traditional healers and That's it's really, really interesting.
There we go.
So might be worth
And
having a
how
look.
would a plant like, for example, Arabidopsis, one of the plants, our main basal plant to study, and over the years we now fully understand its its genomic sequence. We fully understand the history of the plant from where we started to where we finished. So any changes that we make. So how would that come into your work? I mean, I know, for example, we're getting there with hibiscus and with tomatoes and sequencing them in the same way in the Kochiana. So how does that affect the work you do in terms of having that level of understanding and then taking,
So you mean like having understanding for a specific plant, or?
I guess just the basic, a basic understanding of plants, their sequences, and then how does your work fit within that, or your science background?
I guess like the more that we know about plants and the more that we can learn about them, the more we can use them to apply to different things. So I think for this aspect, the psychology and stuff, we can look at the different plants and what they do. Every single plant has different qualities, and I feel like there are so many plants that we haven't explored their properties of yet, and just having a better understanding of those plants and perhaps different families of different plants could lead to us discovering like a wide range of different healing abilities that we can apply.
Absolutely fantastic. Fascinating. So on that note, we're going to move on to our next video now. And I've got my idiot sheet here, which is quite useful. And this next video is, I'm looking at the correct side. There's a lot going on here. The next one is potentially a little bit contentious, but this is called all about tackling crop disease. There we go. Let's roll this one.
Did you know that each year fungal diseases destroy at least 125 million tons of our top 5 crops? Rice, wheat, maize, potatoes and soybeans. This affects the yield profit and causes extensive damage to the environment. These diseases include wheat rust, potato blight and spot blotch. Wheat diseases cause yield losses of about 20% around the world, and wheat and maize cost global agriculture $60 billion. The use of genetic modification is crucial. By 2050, agriculture will need to produce 50% more food due to the increase in world population, and so we need a sufficient amount of crop production.
Therefore, we found a way to solve this problem, which is by gene editing. So gene editing is a type of technology where we can change the characteristics of a plant by adding, replacing, or removing base pairs, which are parts of the DNA sequence. Due to the limited amount of wheat being harvested to fungal diseases, we need to make the wheat more resistant. But the question is, how do we do that? Well, there are a few methods. One of them is using recombinant DNA. So we find a small sequence that contains the disease-resistant genes and insert it into the wheat's DNA. We can also use CRISPR-Cas9 editing. This is a type of technology which uses a protein called Cas9 to detect the position of the DNA to be modified. Then we add the small sequence of the disease-resistant gene to it. If needed, some base pairs will also be deleted, but as a result, the seeds that contain the new genes are grown.
These methods have seen amazing improvements in crop production. For example, in the 1940s, wheat was dwarfed to have heavier grains and be harvested easier. Since then, the production of wheat has increased significantly and saved people from poverty. In 2010, wheat's global production was 653 million metric tons. This shows these methods are safe to use and don't involve the use of pesticides or chemicals. And with genetic modification, the infection of rust decreased by up to 20%. Our take-home message is that we want to raise awareness of these methods and the importance of genetic modification. These methods are still developing and improving, and hopefully this video will encourage people to believe that these methods are a type of technology that has helped us environmentally and economically.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for watching that with us. We're very lucky to be joined by someone who was involved in making that video. So thank you very much. Welcome to the sofa, Theodora.
Thank you.
Just to start us off, as we've asked lots of people, what made you want to focus on this particular issue for your video?
So this, the gene transfer, it was one of my modules in my first year, and I thought it would be cool to use it to tackle disease-resistant crops, because most of them are used to for human, like making insulin, and right now, like a lot of diseases are tackled by antibiotics or antimicrobial, and it would be better to use gene transfer because antimicrobial resistance is really dangerous for the environment now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. That if you're using these broad pesticides or antimicrobial things, that you get to resistance developing in the population. And were there any? You used the example there of was it a rust disease in that one? Yeah, absolutely, because it has this massive impact. Rust diseases. Were there any other particular examples that you thought might be that you thought were particularly significant that you can remember?
I guess papaya was one of the crops that so it was used to the disease was used to be tackled by also pesticides, but then the virus, it was papaya spot ring virus, and the virus developed a resistance to the pesticide, so using resistant gene would tackle the papaya ring spot virus.
Yeah, nice. I think it's often when we talk about plant disease, we get quite focused on wheat and the kind of. I mean, cereal crops are really important, right? But I think there are these other crops that are really important in our lives that bring us all sorts of not only sustenance and vitamins and minerals, but enjoyable things, and certainly. And some of those are quite under threat. Bananas quite under threat as well, I know.
Well, I think the coffee thing is a big issue, I think, at the moment, and with this coffee rust fungus that you were talking about in the video, because not many people know that coffee is the second most traded commodity on earth after oil, and all of the coffee plants in South America, all of them are descended from a single plant, right? And because climate change is increasing the conditions that coffee rust fungus likes, and so this coffee rust fungus is just going crazy across the whole of South America. And the reason that we don't have any coffee grown in Sri Lanka anymore is because that entire crop was wiped out by coffee rust fungus when coffee was first introduced. So our coffee is very, very sensitive and very fragile. So basically trying to breed in this extra or develop this extra disease resistance is really, really, really crucial. So I guess I'm interested because a lot of people, when they see like, ooh, genetic engineering, it's really bad, isn't it? And so I think I'm interested to be, because quite clearly there's a big benefit of this. So I'm curious as to, this clearly, this gene editing side of things is really beneficial in terms of feeding the world. So I'm curious as to what you would say to people who might be maybe a bit like, oh, GM, like, I don't know.
Yeah, actually, naturally we've been doing that by crossbreeding plants, crops to make it more resistant or have more yield. But we, with this modern technology, we can cut through time because crossbreeding takes generations and a lot of years, and with gene transfer it'll be easier and faster.
Yeah, so it's just speeding up a process that we were doing anyway. But
yeah, and I think there's an argument that of it being more specific as well when you're I think you covered that a little bit and mentioned that in the video, that it's when you're breeding, you're selecting the traits that you want, but you don't know what else is going on. But this selective work with particular genes can be quite precise.
Definitely. I mean, we used to use these things called gamma gardens in the 1950s, where we would just blast plants with a radioactive source and just cause all these random mutations in them and just hope for the best. And so all of the mint that we now get in supermarkets is a descendant where they just blasted it with radiation, and it caused a mutation that made it resistant to a type of fungus. Which meant that we now can get mint in our supermarkets and have mint tea and all the rest of it, whereas previously, with the mint before the 1950s, we wouldn't have been able to.
Nice.
Facts.
Nice.
Here they go. There we go.
Before we move on to our next video, I was just going to ask Theodora the question we've been asking everyone, just kind of what your route to here today. How did you get here today?
Route.
Route again, deliberate. But what are you studying at the moment, and where hopefully you're interested in plants. But
Yeah, I study biotechnology, but this semester I chose an optional module of applied plant physiology. It's basically studying on how plants respond to environments such as like different light intensity or like water or like nutrients in the soil. So yeah.
Oh, cool.
And so, where are you studying at the moment?
I study at University of Nottingham.
Nice, nice.
Have you been into some of the sort of like growth chamber places?
Yeah, I went to a greenhouse, and they were growing wheat that could have proteins in it, and it was so cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
nice.
really awesome. That's really awesome. Thank you ever so much. That was a really cool video. So, continue to explore the world or the potential of gene technology and gene editing. We've now got, which looks to be quite a fun video, by a team of our undergrads who put together a bit of a newsreel, it would seem. So let's roll that and see what happens.
Hello and welcome to Hot Gossip.
We're your hosts,
Rainbow Dream
and me, Sunshine Buttercup.
And in today's show, we will be taking a slightly different approach.
Yes, indeed. Today we're diving into the world of science.
As temperatures are rising due to climate change, crop yield failures is becoming a big issue.
Indeed. Current predictions are showing the probability of crop yield failure to be as much as 25 times higher by 2050.
And as a result, it is now said that 828 million people go to bed hungry every night.
But scientists think they have a solution to our problem.
Of course they do.
A relatively old method of breeding crops has had a new update, which scientists believe could prevent any future crop yield failure.
You guessed it. Today we will be talking about the controversial topic of GM.
And last week, we spoke to two scientists who believe in its magic. Hello and welcome back to Hot Gossip. And today we are also joined by Dr. Helena and Dr. Tabitha, who are going to tell us all about GM.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for having us in to talk to you today.
No worries.
Yes, such an important issue that we want to get people talking about, so this is great.
So ladies, my first question for you is, what is GM?
Well, GM just stands for genetic modification, which involves improving the characteristics of plants so they can be better used by people.
Okay.
But what does GM do for us, and why are you so convinced that we need it?
Well, we're really excited about the possibility of using genetic modification to create climate-resistant crops that will be resilient to all kinds of changing weather, like droughts and flooding. This means we'll be able to grow them in places that they wouldn't have even been able to survive before.
So, obviously this is all good news and stuff, but what other incentives are there to grow GM?
Apart from feeding the future population?
Yeah.
Well, I can answer this one. So not only is GM key to feeding a future population, but it's also a way to deliver key vitamins to people.
Right, but why would we care about that?
Yeah.
Well, as we've seen with golden rice, which is infused with vitamin A helps to support a healthy immune system, which can reduce your risk of acne and keep you hydrated, giving your skin a healthy glow, as well as a whole host of other benefits.
So what you're saying is that I can get nice skin by eating GM crops?
Yeah.
Nice.
We also haven't even got on to discussing how buying GM crops can help you save money.
Okay, do tell.
Well, many GM crops are able to grow using less water and pesticides, and this means that farmers will be able to grow crops more cheaply, and therefore food prices will be lower.
I see no flaw to this plan.
One thing we might be forgetting, freaky side effects. I don't want to grow an extra limb just because I decided to trust new science.
Yeah, and I have heard that GM contains a high level of toxins.
And can alter our DNA.
Well, all of this misinformation is actually one of the main reasons we want to get people talking about GM crops again. We've been genetically engineering crops for hundreds of years through selective breeding. Like, farmers have chosen the best and biggest and tastiest carrots or potatoes and so on, and have bred them together so that they can keep growing great crops for us.
Although this particular way of genetic engineering crops is fairly new, there have been over 100 research studies comparing the effects of traditional food to GM crops since its commercialization, and there have been no evidence of any ill effects from eating approved GM crops.
So, no toxins?
No.
And no changes to my DNA?
No.
It's just making crops more resilient and more nutritious.
Well, folks, you heard it here first.
Indeed, there may be a light at the end of the tunnel.
And I don't know about you, but I'm on board with the GM crew.
So what are we waiting for?
Well, actually, we do need to try and convince governments to lift the restrictions that are on GM crops so that we can...
Jeez, guys, one problem at a time, please.
Oh, okay, these scientists getting ahead of themselves?
Why then? So rude. How much time do they think we have?
Speaking of which, I'm afraid that it's time for us to go.
I know. Sad times indeed.
But we will see you next week.
With a special on Kylie Jenner and what beauty hacks she's kept hidden from you.
Once again, we are your hosts, Rainbow Dream.
And me, Sunshine Buttercup. Bye for now.
Looks like we've got some competition for our live broadcasts from that team. It was a really fun way of looking at GM crops and thinking about how we talk about them and how we might how different things different people might care about when we're thinking about GM crops. We're lucky enough to be joined by, I think, two members of that team. So we've got Hannah on the sofa, and I think we've got Tabitha online as well. So there she is. Oh, fantastic. Tabitha and Kat. Don't look at it, it's not a plant. So thanks very much for joining us. I was just going to ask, we'll start with Hannah and then we'll go to Tabitha afterwards, just so you don't end up talking over each other. Just why did you choose that particular approach of doing something a bit like a sort of sketch, I suppose?
I think it was Bethany's idea because we just wanted to bring the approach to people to not be afraid of GM crops, because we've been eating GM crops for so long, but people are generally, they don't really know what it is, so it terrifies them. And we just wanted to build their information and let them know, it's normal. We have GM crops, don't be terrified.
Absolutely. And is there anything in that, thinking, I nearly looked at the screen then, I'll look at the camera to speak to you, Tabitha. As you were putting that together, were there sort of different ways you were thinking about communicating around GM crops, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, I think it's quite important to understand about the different ways that you can explain things to people who might not necessarily know about DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, thinking about explaining things to different audiences, people with different backgrounds. We've got a lot of people who know a lot about science in the room here today, but actually, you know, lots of people don't have that same background. So I think, yeah, you guys did a really good job of that. It was really good fun. I really enjoyed your use of humour in it. It was really engaging. We're joined also back on the sofa. Should we say this morning we've got Pallavi on the sofa as well. So Pallavi's work involves looking at how we can think about developing crops and using different approaches to develop crops that are more efficient and produce more food for us. And I think GM is quite a key part of that. Is that part of the work that you're hoping to do in your new lab that you've just set up?
Yeah, absolutely. So my research revolves around like improving crop production and more looking at the side of photosynthesis and how plants can make their food better and use water, nitrogen more efficiently to have higher yields, that is more grains. And I think the GM approach or genetically modified approaches are very crucial to answering these questions. So we are looking at like very molecular levels of things and then going to a very so I would probably say that we are just like engineers working with plants and looking precisely at different genes or the codes of DNA and just changing it very precisely and working towards like making plants more resilient to say pathogens, for instance, or making them grow better, make better use of the resources and nutrition that they have. And just following up on that, we're also looking at the CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which is not just genetically modifying the whole thing, but being very precise and genetically editing the exact gene or the sequence that we want in the plant. So there's lots of new development going on with this transgenic technologies, which I think is for good, for sure.
So I feel like my role in the room is I'm going to be devil's advocate, okay? And I'm going to try and pose some questions which are a bit like not anti-GM necessarily, but on the fence about GM. And please feel free to answer these questions. So I feel that the drive toward increasing these better crops to feed the world, climate resistance, disease resistance, etc., is very well founded. And I feel like it comes from a very good place. I guess we're talking about high levels of scientific literacy and people understanding the scientific process behind this. I think one thing that people are maybe a little bit worried about from scientists is this maybe level of arrogance that we've thought through everything. And there's definitely times in the past where we've trusted scientists and been like, and they're like, trust me, it's the best thing to do. And then it's like, oh, actually, we didn't think of that, or we didn't fully understand that process. One that's off the top of my head is like the introduction of cane toads into Australia, where the cane toads were introduced to eat the cane beetles so we could grow more sugar cane. And then once they were there, the cane toads were like, oh, there's loads of other stuff to eat. I'm not going to eat that. And now the cane toads, you can't stop them, and they're ravishing. They're just moving across the whole of Australia. So obviously at the time when they were introduced, everyone listened to the scientists, and the scientists had the best intentions. So I'm just curious, trying to draw a particular parallel between that. I guess one of the worries is, okay, we've made this Franken plant, this that wouldn't occur naturally. What do we think? Are there any dangers of releasing this into a wild place? I don't know. I'm just being devil's advocate here.
So I think, the plants have been growing in the fields for a long time. And if you think about the gene pool being mixing, that's been happening for like years and years. So for example, the maize that we eat at the moment was never the maize that was present in the wild cultivar. So the teosintine, which is the wild cultivar of maize, was very, very different, and you won't even recognize it as a maize plant versus what we have now. So I think that is something not really to worry, but I wouldn't say that take the words of the scientists as a gospel. We are doing a lot of field testing. So we have special like areas where we are testing these plants to see that there's no detrimental effects to the wild ecosystem, for instance. And that's not just happening in one location. We're trying to, geographically spread it at different places and see how that is affecting, say, pollination, for instance, or like any sort of horizontal gene transfer that might happen with the other gene pools, or like the wild ecosystem, for instance.
So when you say horizontal gene transfer, that's genes, that's interbreeding with wild plants in that area.
Absolutely, but that happens like on a normal basis, even in a wild ecosystem, if you would say. It's not something that would be accelerated because it's a GM plant or not. And I think now with like these precise technologies like CRISPR-Cas9, we know exactly what we are tailoring or what we are addressing. So, these whole skepticism about whether that would be more readily transferred to the wild system becomes quite less, because we know that we precisely edited one thing and there's no backlog of it to actually be transferred into the ecosystem, for instance.
Yeah, and I think it's worth thinking about these things as a whole, that when we are starting to use these technologies, that just because we've got a plant, for example, that is resistant to a herbicide, that doesn't mean it's necessarily a good idea to spread herbicides everywhere and use those loads and loads. Which is something that can happen and has happened in the past. So it's you're thinking in a more sort of holistic ecosystem approach, perhaps, is part of that. And certainly the work that goes on in just if people are wondering, because obviously there's work that goes on in labs as well. We're doing these, there are field trials that happen, but the work that goes on in labs is very tightly controlled and things are not allowed. There's no risk of anything that people are working on that hasn't then been tested of getting out into the environment. That's all very well looked after.
No, definitely, and I think one of the other aspects to look at is one of the big causes of or loss of diversity is cutting down forests for arable land. So if we can get more per area out of our arable land by using GM crops, it makes it more efficient, which fundamentally will reduce biodiversity loss from intensive agriculture further down the line. So there we go. So we're going to bring people back onto the sofa. We're going to try and get everyone on the sofa. No, there we go. Katie, do you want to come join us on the sofa? And and Dan, do you want to come back on the sofa? Thank you. And we're going to see if we've got any questions hanging out online anywhere. If you've got any questions, what I forgot to say throughout the thing, please put them on. Don't forget to send us your questions. If you've got any questions, while we're waiting for people to text in some questions, has anyone in the audience got any questions for our wonderful panelists or for each other? No one's got any questions. Brilliant. Oh, we've got a question.
Yeah, so like with GM, we are increasing the production and everything. So what we are doing, like, because we are getting all the nutrients from the soil, so how we are replenishing them, like the soil? And the second bit, when we are getting the produce, how we are trying to, because now, like in developing countries, the post-harvest production, like the harvesting equipment or the facility is not that good. So even we have like a good production, we lose the fruit, crops and everything. So what we are doing like to facilitate that according to our like GM planning and everything.
So just for people who might not have been able to hear that because they weren't near the microphones, the first question there was about what are we doing to replenish the nutrients in soil when we've got these GM crops which we're growing. So does anyone like to?
I think it depends where we're growing the plant. If we're growing them in a glass house, then we will use the soil will be re-sterilized with hot air that literally So let's say we have a wheat crop and it's growing directly in the soil and it has a glasshouse environment over it, and then you'll literally put almost like a mini polytunnel directly over the soil, and then you'll supply hot air into that environment, and then that will kill off any pathogens or anything remaining in that soil, and then it can be reused. Somewhere like an outside environment, and this doesn't just apply to genetically modified crops, this is just crops in general. So like allotments, so when you're growing at home, you'll have your plots on rotation. That is, so that you don't have the same diseases that go specific with that plant, and that you're giving the new crop a chance to thrive. Yeah.
So just because something is a GM crop doesn't mean you should treat it differently. So there's still this idea of a sustainable agricultural practices and moving away from monocultures and doing things like crop rotation to allow the soil to rejuvenate over time. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And the second question, I got distracted by the first one.
The second question was around infrastructure around
post-harvest.
agriculture and post.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that's an important question about thinking that not just getting the fruits or like the seeds from the crops, it's more about how that reaches the market and how well it is stored for the time being. And I think there's some work that's going on in some of these institutions, for instance, like at IRI in the Philippines that works on rice, for instance, and at CIMMYT, which works on wheat, thinking about what is the best way to harvest these seeds and how they can be stored well, and also educating the farmers about the best housekeeping of these seeds, for instance, and how it could be stored for longer duration. And there's been, I think, lots of involvement of even the general public to be aware about the issues associated with post-harvest best practices and best keeping of these grains and fruits, for instance. And one of the examples for that was the tomato, the flower sour tomato, which is a GM tomato that actually increases the shelf life of tomatoes. So probably a normal tomato would die off in a week or so, but then with this flower sour gene, they could increase the shelf life of tomato for longer. So, genetic modified crop actually comes into this post-harvest side of things and making it live longer on the shelf.
So reducing food waste at the same time, which is, I think, was it a third of the food that we make ends up going to waste or something like that?
Absolutely. And I think one thing that I've noticed as a supermarket where we buy our food at home, it says no best before date on the fruit and veg that we buy now, on the packaging that you get, because there's no need. You can see whether a carrot is any good or not. If it's gone all bendy and floppy, then you can probably still cook it, but it's so
you don't want to use it with your hummus, Yeah.
So that post production loss is really important. I think that's why I find plant science so interesting, because there's so many different aspects that you can research and look at and think about. It's not just about the growing of the plant; it's the 50% of the action that's going on underground and the release of some of the photosynthate into the ground that maintains that collection of organisms underground that helps the plant gather more resources. It's about thinking about how you get less disease. It's about how you maintain the crop for longer, how you maximize yield. So many different elements, I think, are so important to us being able to produce our food more sustainability.
And I think that, we talk about buying things in the supermarket and that post-harvest, that's still a living, the fruit and vegetables that we buy they're still living until the cells start to die and they start to rot. And I think that in itself is an amazing thing to think about. And you talk about not having best before dates, and we're trying to move to using less plastics, but then there are some things that if they don't travel in plastic, then they get too damaged to eat. So I think cucumbers are one of those. Cucumbers are one of those things that actually we don't like to see things wrapped in plastic, but actually if you don't wrap cucumbers up in plastic, then they get too damaged during transport, and then they don't get eaten at all. So it's these things, they're complicated issues.
And I think that also goes hand in hand with technology. So, for example, apples will spend months and months in controlled environments, in very cold temperatures, to keep them going for the year. And packaging, like you said, is very important as well. Yeah, I do find the topic of genetically modified plants and also organic plants and also packaging all quite interesting, because we talk about, say, you could have your raspberries at this time of year, but they're being flown all the way from South Africa. So obviously the carbon footprint there is huge, but they'll say organic on them, etc. And you're just like, well, hang on a second, which offsets which? So I think it is part of a larger picture. I think it's important not to just focus on genetically modified plants or packaging or controlled environments. I think you've got to see it as a holistic, I think you were saying, a holistic approach to how we view these things.
Yeah, again, we talk broadly about the environmental impact of different foods, but you really need to be super specific about what that environmental impact of different foods are. So, for example, if you look at greenhouse gas emissions, coffee isn't far off beef once you take into it per kilogram, when you take into account all how it's manufactured and land use change and all the rest of it. And nuts are actually carbon negative because they grow on trees and they take carbon out of the atmosphere. But then when you look at it in terms of water use, then nuts are some of the worst, because they are grown in areas where water scarcity is very high, like a lot of almonds are grown in California. So there's that aspect. And then when you look at biodiversity loss, things like palm oil have got a lot of bad rap because they're associated with the destruction of rainforests and orangutans. But actually, coconut oil is far worse in terms of biodiversity loss, because most coconut palms grow on these isolated island chains where they've got a lot of endemic species which are much more at risk. So it's really interesting. So it's like you've got to you're like, what? This is an absolute minefield. You've got to kind of pick your battle. Am I going for plastic? Am I going for carbon? Am I going for water? Am I going for biodiversity? So and I guess to a degree, as well as GM helping us get more out of a square, it also, or a specific area, it also comes down to, I guess, to kind of eating more locally and seasonally, broadly. Is that a thing that we like? Yeah. Everyone's like, what are you talking about? There we go.
No, absolutely. And I think that, as Dan said, thinking about studying plants and looking at plants and understanding more about them, and certainly, one of the reasons I like doing my job is because you're always picking up, learning new things about how plants have different strategies to survive, even though they look like they're not doing much, they look like they can't move, they look like they can't communicate, when actually they are moving, they are communicating, there's all sorts going on inside their cells that we're just not able to see just without digging a little bit deeper. So I think, and there are all these different things that they impact on, and we talked earlier about how there are processes in plants that are the same as processes that happen for humans or for bacteria and they have all this amazing impact. So I think they're really certainly why I like communicating about plants and talking about them, because they've got so much impact. So much to give. Absolutely. So much to give to the world.
And on that note, we hope that you have enjoyed learning about plants and speaking to all our speakers, watching all these amazing videos. As much as we have, I've learnt loads. It's been a fantastic time. If you have got any comments, unfortunately, you can't ask them live, but you can ask them in the space below, and our team will do our best to respond to those questions. But you've been a fantastic audience. You guys have been fantastic as well. Okay, let's just make loads of noise, because this is the end of the live stream, and we can go and chill out after this. So yeah, woohoo! Yeah, there we go. But thank you to everyone. You've all been wonderful human beings. You're a wonderful human being.
You're a wonderful human being.
Thank you. And you guys have been great. And thank you for watching Rootstock. See you next year.